I still remember the warmth of that glass jar against my palms. It felt alive. I stood in the small, quiet lab at the back of Vale and Thorne Organics, the place that had quietly become my entire world for the last 8 years. The soft hum of the ventilation fan filled the air. The scent of fresh lavender and cold sea salt lingered, the exact blend my mother, Elowen Vale, had taught me to love before she left us. My hands trembled slightly as I held the jar out to him. "Here, Dad," I whispered, my voice barely louder than the fan. "This is the final version. I stayed up until 3 this morning to get it right. It's the one Mom always dreamed we would make together." Draven Vale looked down at the jar. For one brief second, his eyes softened, the same gentle look he used to give me when I was small, and he would lift me onto the counter to watch Mom mix creams. He took the jar carefully, turned it slowly in his hands, then lifted his gaze to the small group of staff gathered near the doorway. "Everyone, come see this," he said, his voice warm and confident, the one he always used when investors were watching. "My daughter just handed us the future of this company. Liora, you've outdone yourself this time." A few people clapped. Someone let out a low whistle. I felt heat rise in my face. After 8 long years of burned batches, sleepless nights, and quiet sacrifices, that moment felt like validation. Like everything had finally been worth it. I smiled back at him. I actually smiled. A few hours later, the lab had gone still. Most of the team had left for the day. I stayed behind, wiping down the counters, humming the old lullaby my mother used to sing while she worked. The golden afternoon light slanted through the high windows. That was when I saw the email notification on my laptop. Subject: Finalized brand agreement. Thorne Glow Collection. My stomach tightened before I even clicked it open. The document loaded slowly. My eyes scanned the first page, then froze. The entire new premium line. Every single note, every measurement, every secret from the formula I had just given my father was now registered under Sable Thorne's name. Not Vale and Thorne Organics, just Thorne. And listed as co-creators: Kale Vale and Riven Vale, my 9-year-old half-brothers. My name was not there. Not anywhere. I kept scrolling, fingers numb. At the bottom of the memo, one cold line stood out. Effective immediately, Liora Vale's position has been terminated due to cultural misalignment with the company's new direction. The jar I had handed him with so much hope, the last living piece of my mother's dream, had just been used to erase me completely. I don't remember leaving the building. I only remember the sharp, salty wind hitting my face as I stood in the empty parking lot, clutching a small cardboard box against my chest. Inside were the last 6 sample jars I had poured with my own hands. The drive to the beach passed in silence. By the time I reached the sand, the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in deep oranges and bruised pinks. The waves crashed steadily against the rocks, loud and indifferent. I walked until the water almost touched my shoes, then sank down onto the cold, damp sand. I opened the box with shaking hands. The faint scent of lavender and sea salt rose up to meet me, Elowen's exact signature. My mother's scent, the one I had spent years trying to honor. Tears slipped silently down my cheeks. They came without sound, without sobs, just hot, steady streams that the wind tried to dry before they could fall. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I simply sat there, staring at the horizon, feeling 8 years of love, loyalty, and quiet hope fracture inside my chest like thin glass. They hadn't just taken the company from me. They had taken the last bridge I still had left to my mother, and they had burned it while smiling. I wiped my face slowly with the sleeve of my sweater. My breath came shallow and uneven. The pain was so deep it felt almost calm. In that quiet, devastating moment, something inside me shifted. Not with anger. Not with loud defiance. Just a small, terrifying click of finality. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but I knew, with every broken piece of my heart, that I was done being erased. The sun dipped lower. The sky deepened into indigo. I closed the box gently, tucked it under my arm, and stood up. Behind me, the distant lights of town still glowed warmly, the company I had helped build still shining without me. I turned my back to it, and I started walking into the growing dark, alone, but no longer lost. The drive back from the beach felt endless. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The small cardboard box sat on the passenger seat like a fragile passenger I was afraid to disturb. When I finally pulled into the driveway of my grandparents' old house, the porch light was already on. Thornvale and Miravale were waiting at the door. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar smell of old wood and lavender sachets hit me. My grandmother Mira pulled me into her arms without a word. She held me tight, her small frame surprisingly strong, as if she already knew everything before I said a single sentence. That night, my Aunt Callista Vale flew in from Seattle. She arrived just after midnight, still wearing her travel coat, eyes tired but fierce. She didn't ask for details right away. She simply sat beside me on the worn living room couch and took my cold hands in hers. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." The next few days blurred into a heavy fog. I barely left my childhood bedroom, the same room where I used to hide under the blankets when my parents fought. Now I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the full weight of the betrayal sink into my bones. Then the news came. Only 2 weeks after I was fired. Thorne Glow, officially launched. The main product line used the exact formula I had perfected, the one my mother Elowen had passed down to me in her final months. Sable Thorne was everywhere in the photos, smiling confidently, posing with Kale and Riven as if they had created everything themselves. I watched the launch video on my phone. Volume turned low. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. That evening, my father finally called. I answered on the third ring, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Dad!" My voice cracked before I could stop it. Draven's tone was calm. Too calm. "Liora, this is a business decision," he said flatly. "We have to move forward. Sable has a strong vision for the brand. You just weren't aligning with where we're headed." I waited for him to say something more, to show even a flicker of regret, to acknowledge the 8 years I had given everything to that company. But there was only silence on his end. Then he added quietly, "It's better this way." The call ended. I sat there holding the phone long after the screen went dark. The real breaking point came 2 days later. I was searching through old company files on my laptop, hoping to find some record of my contributions. Instead, I discovered that every single document with my name on it had been deleted. Project notes, formulation records, even the photos of me working late in the lab, all gone. It was as if I had never existed inside Vale and Thorne Organics. The pain that rose in me wasn't loud. It was a deep, suffocating ache that made me curl into myself on the bed. I cried until there were no tears left. That was when the first small light appeared. A delivery truck stopped in front of my grandparents' house the next morning. The driver handed me a large box with no return address. Inside were carefully packed jars of raw ingredients: lavender oil, sea salt crystals, beeswax, and several rare botanicals I recognized immediately. Tucked at the bottom was a simple handwritten note. "Dear Liora, you didn't lose anything. You are only being reborn. Elena Voss." Elena, my old mentor. The woman who had taught me the true art of formulation long before I joined my father's company. I held that note for a long time, my thumb tracing her elegant handwriting. Later that afternoon, Marcus Hale, an old friend of my grandfather, and a sharp lawyer came by the house. He sat at the kitchen table with Thorne and Mira, speaking in low, careful tones. I stood in the doorway listening. "There may be legal grounds here," he said quietly. "The deletion of records, the sudden termination, the use of proprietary formulas. It's not as clean as they want it to look." I didn't say anything. The idea of fighting in court felt exhausting, terrifying even. But something inside me had already begun to stir. A few days later, I drove to the edge of town. Elena Voss owned an old weathered warehouse that she used as a workshop. She had left the side door unlocked for me. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The space smelled of dried herbs and fresh wood. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating rows of empty glass jars stacked neatly on shelves. I walked slowly between them, my fingers brushing the cool surfaces. Memories flooded back, my mother's gentle hands guiding mine. The sound of her laughter when a batch turned out perfectly. The way she used to say, "This isn't just cream, sweetheart. It's care in a jar." I stopped in front of a large wooden table covered in clean, empty bottles. For the first time since that day on the beach, the crushing weight in my chest eased just a little. I picked up one small empty jar and held it up to the light. The words left my lips in a whisper. Soft, but steady. I won't let them erase me. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't filled with rage. It was something quieter, deeper, a promise. As I stood there surrounded by those silent glass jars, the heavy fog of betrayal began to lift. The pain was still there, raw and real, but beneath it, something new was quietly taking root. A silent, burning determination. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time since I handed my father that last jar, I felt like I was no longer just surviving. I was beginning to choose. The old warehouse smelled of dust and possibility. I stood in the middle of the wide, empty space that once belonged to Elena Voss. Morning light cutting through the high windows and dusty beams. My grandparents, Thorne and Liora, had quietly arranged for me to use it. No questions, no pressure. Just the keys placed gently in my hand one quiet evening. Lila Moreau arrived the very next day. My oldest friend, the artist with paint always under her nails, hugged me so tightly I almost broke again. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and said, "Let's build something that feels like you." Together, with the silent support of my grandparents watching from the sidelines, we began. We cleaned the floors until they shone. We set up long wooden tables. We lined shelves with empty glass jars that caught the light like tiny promises. And in the center of it all, we painted the name in soft, elegant letters on the wall. Elowen's Echo. Every evening after that, I stood at the mixing station, hands deep in the work my mother once taught me. The familiar scents wrapped around me, lavender, sea salt, warm beeswax. Each jar I filled felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I thought had been stolen. One rainy afternoon, a knock echoed through the warehouse. I opened the side door to find Jasper Reed standing there, collar turned up against the drizzle. He was a local investigative journalist, quiet-eyed and careful with his words. He didn't come inside right away. He simply handed me a plain envelope. "I thought you should see this," he said softly. "Off the record. For now." Inside were copies of internal documents. Clear proof that Sable Thorne had copied my mother's formulas almost line by line. The timestamps didn't lie. My hands shook as I read them. For a moment, the old anger surged hot in my chest. I imagined lawyers, courtrooms, public fights, the kind of loud revenge that would feel satisfying for a day and leave me emptier afterward. I looked at Jasper and shook my head slowly. "I'm not going to fight them that way," I whispered. "Not with noise, not with hate." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Then tell your story through the jars," he said. "Let the truth speak in the only language they can't control." That became my quiet rebellion. Instead of lawsuits, I poured everything into the cream. I wrote small, handwritten notes on every label, the real story behind each scent, the nights I stayed up with my mother's old notebook, the love and loss folded into every batch. Lila turned those words into delicate illustrations that wrapped around the jars like gentle armor. My grandparents helped in their own quiet ways. Thorne carried heavy boxes without complaint. Mira brought fresh bread and sat watching me work, her eyes full of pride and something deeper healing perhaps. Week by week, the fear inside me began to change shape. It was no longer the sharp terror of being erased. It became a steady, burning focus. I was no longer just the daughter who had been thrown away. I was becoming the woman who chose to create anyway. Then came the night of the first market. The local coastal fair was small, strung with warm lights and the smell of salt air. We set up a simple wooden table under a white canopy. Elowen's Echo had only 6 products, nothing flashy, just honest jars filled with care. I was terrified. My hands trembled as I arranged the display. What if no one came? What if they laughed? What if this small dream died before it could even breathe? People began to stop. They read the labels. They listened when I spoke softly about my mother. They smelled the creams and closed their eyes for a moment too long. By the end of the 3rd hour, the table was nearly empty. We had sold out. Completely. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Photos of the jars appeared on phones. Quiet messages started flooding in women, sharing how the scent reminded them of someone they had lost, how the texture felt like coming home. That same night, I learned that Draven and Sable had seen it all. Someone sent me a screenshot. Sable pacing in their sleek office, voice sharp with panic. Draven staring at his phone, face pale, saying nothing. For the first time, they were the ones watching something grow without them. Later that evening, after the market lights had dimmed and Lila had gone home, I sat alone in the warehouse. The only light came from a small desk lamp. In front of me was an old framed photo I had brought from my grandparents' house, my mother Elowen, young and smiling, holding a jar of cream up to the light, her eyes full of quiet joy. I picked it up gently, my thumb brushing across the glass. Tears welled, but this time they felt different. Not broken. Not defeated. I leaned close and whispered, voice soft but clear in the stillness, "Mom, I'm not a shadow anymore." The words hung in the air like a promise. In that quiet moment, I felt the shift deep inside my chest, from victim to creator, from anger to purpose, from lost to found. The road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time since I had handed my father that last jar, I wasn't walking backward into pain. I was walking forward, into something that was finally mine. The first sign that something was breaking came in the quietest way. Sales reports for Thorne Glow began to drop. Not slowly, sharply. Customers were posting side-by-side photos online. The sleek, expensive jars from my father's company next to the simple, handwritten ones from Elowen's Echo. The formulas were too similar. The notes were too familiar. Whispers turned into questions, then into loud conversations. I didn't celebrate when I saw the numbers. I only felt a strange, heavy ache in my chest. One rainy Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with notifications. Sable Thorne had begun her counterattack. She posted long, emotional videos on social media. Her voice trembled with practiced hurt as she claimed I had stolen family secrets and was trying to destroy the company my own father had built. Paid accounts started flooding the comments under every Elowen's Echo post, calling me ungrateful, dramatic, even delusional. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. I sat in the warehouse late that night, staring at the glowing screen, feeling the old fear crawl back into my throat. For a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake by choosing silence over war. Then Callista Vale stepped in. My aunt drove down from Seattle again, this time with fire in her eyes. She sat with Marcus Hale at my grandparents' kitchen table and laid everything bare. Bank records, hidden transfers, years of Sable quietly manipulating the company books, moving money, rewriting agreements without full disclosure. "She didn't just take your formulas," Callista said quietly, looking straight at me. "She's been taking everything for a long time." Marcus listened carefully, his face serious but calm. He didn't push me toward court. He simply said, "The truth has a way of surfacing when you stop trying to force it." My grandparents, Thorne and Liora Vale, made their own quiet move. They invited Draven to the old house one Sunday afternoon. Not for confrontation, not for shouting, just coffee at the worn kitchen table where I had eaten breakfast as a child. I stayed in the next room, door slightly open, listening. Thorne spoke first, his voice low and steady. "Son, look at what you've built. Look at what you've lost. Not money, not products, but your daughter." Draven didn't answer right away. I heard the clink of his cup against the saucer, the long pause that felt like years. Liora added gently, "We're not here to punish you. We're here to ask you to see clearly before it's too late." I never heard my father's full reply, only the heavy silence that followed. Meanwhile, I poured every remaining piece of my heart into one final product. I worked late into the nights, mixing, testing, adjusting. The serum took shape slowly, delicate, powerful, infused with botanicals that spoke of renewal. I named it Second Bloom. Each drop carried the story of rising after being buried. It wasn't revenge. It was proof that I could still create beauty from pain. Then came the article. Jasper Reed published his investigation late one evening. It was careful, factual, and devastating. He laid out the copied formulas, the deleted records, the financial irregularities. No sensational headlines, just quiet, undeniable truth. By morning, Thorne Glow's largest retail partner had canceled their contract. The news spread like wildfire. I was in the warehouse when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's name. My heart slammed against my ribs. My thumb hovered over the screen for several long seconds before I answered. "Liora." Draven's voice was raw, shaking in a way I had never heard before. I didn't know it would go this far. The formulas, the way everything happened, I thought we could just move forward. I was wrong. He paused. I could hear him breathing. Unsteady. "I miss you. I miss who we used to be." I stood completely still. The serum bottles lined up neatly in front of me like silent witnesses. Memories flashed the proud smile he gave me the day I handed him that last jar, the cold silence when he told me it was just business, the way he deleted every trace of my years of work. I closed my eyes. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, steady, and calm, in a way that surprised even me. "I hear you, Dad." Then, I gently ended the call. No shouting. No tears. No long explanation. Just the soft click of the line going dead. I set the phone down on the wooden table and stared at the golden liquid glowing inside the second bloom bottles. Something had finally shifted inside my chest. The sharp, burning pain that had lived there for so long had changed. It was no longer screaming to be heard. It had become quiet strength. I was no longer waiting for my father to choose me. I had already chosen myself. Outside, the Oregon rain tapped steadily against the warehouse roof. Inside, the scent of fresh botanicals filled the air, soft, hopeful, alive. The empire my father and Sable had built was beginning to crack. And I was finally standing on solid ground. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days. It softened the edges of everything, the old warehouse roof, the wooden tables, even the sharp edges of the pain I had carried for so long. Marcus Hale arrived one gray morning with a thick folder under his arm. He placed it gently on the table in front of my grandparents. Thornvale and Miravale sat side by side, their hands quietly clasped together. With calm, precise words, Marcus explained the documents. My grandparents had made their final decision. They were transferring every remaining share they still held in the original company directly to me. No drama, no public announcement, just a quiet legal act that returned what had once been taken. I didn't cry when I signed the papers. I only felt a deep, trembling breath leave my body as if I had been holding it since the day I stood on that beach with the cardboard box in my arms. Not long after, the investigation into Sable Thorne intensified. The financial irregularities Callista had uncovered proved deeper than anyone expected. Sable lost control quickly. Her carefully built image began to crumble. One morning, she packed her things and left town with Kyle and Riven. The sleek car disappeared down the coastal road without a backward glance. The empire had finally cracked wide open. Then came the afternoon I will never forget. It was still raining, a soft, persistent drizzle that blurred the windows of the warehouse. I was standing at the packing table, carefully wrapping orders of second bloom serum, when the side door creaked open. Draven Vale stepped inside. He was alone. His coat was damp, his shoulders slightly hunched. The confident man who once smiled proudly in front of the entire company was gone. In his place stood someone older, smaller, eyes red-rimmed and uncertain. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there in the doorway, watching me fold brown paper around the glass bottles with steady hands. The sound of rain on the roof filled the silence between us. Memories rushed through me in waves, the warmth of the last jar I had handed him, the cold silence on the phone when he called it just business, the trembling voice when he called after Jasper's article. I kept working, but my fingers slowed. After a long moment, I looked up and met his eyes. Draven opened his mouth, then closed it again. His gaze dropped to the rows of finished serum bottles glowing softly under the warm lights. "I lost everything," he said finally, his voice rough and low. "The company. The house. Almost all of it." He paused, swallowing hard. "I thought I was protecting our future. Instead, I destroyed it." I didn't answer right away. The old wound ached, deep and familiar. Part of me still waited for the words I had longed to hear for years, a real apology, an admission that went beyond excuses. But he didn't say them. Instead, he just stood there, looking at me with eyes full of regret he couldn't quite put into words. I reached for one of the finished bottles of second bloom. The golden liquid caught the light as I held it out to him. My hand was steady. I didn't offer it with anger. I didn't offer it with forgiveness either. I simply placed the jar gently into his open palm and said softly, "This is what I created from what you tried to take away." Draven stared at the bottle for a long time. His fingers closed around it carefully, as if it might break. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. He didn't speak. He only nodded once, a small, broken movement, then turned and walked back out into the rain. The door clicked shut behind him. I stood there for a while, listening to the rain, feeling the quiet space he left behind. Something inside me finally settled. Not because he had changed, but because I no longer needed him to. A few weeks later, on a clear evening when the sky turned soft gold and pink, I stood on the beach with the people who had chosen to stay. Elena Voss stood on my left, her silver hair catching the last light of the sun. Lila Moreau was beside her, sketchbook tucked under her arm. Callista Vale stood on my right, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. We watched the waves roll in, steady and endless. The air smelled of salt and wildflowers. I looked out at the horizon, feeling the cool sand beneath my bare feet, and spoke the words that had been growing inside me for months. Real justice? isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. It's about becoming so strong, so whole, that they no longer have the power to break you. Elena smiled softly. Lila squeezed my hand. Callista leaned her head against mine for a moment. In the distance, the lights of the small coastal town glowed warmly. Elowen's echo had grown far beyond that first market night. It had become more than a brand, it had become a quiet symbol of healing, of turning pain into something beautiful and true. I no longer needed to break the jar my father once held. I had learned to fill my own. As the sun slipped below the ocean, painting the sky in deep amber and rose, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind, built on silence and avoidance, but the real kind earned through fire, rebuilt with care, and carried forward with open hands. This is the story of how a daughter learned that the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all. It is choosing to rise, to create, and to forgive yourself long before the world ever asks you to forgive anyone else. And in that rising, she found the kind of light no one could ever take away again. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.